I stand before you at the crossroads of 2 centuries. You see, I run a 100-year-old family business based in California that sells lumber to builders who build houses. I'm the 4th generation to do so, and I've been doing it for 27 years, although I've been walking lumber yards for over 50 with my father. From my vantage point, I look back at 100 years of lessons as I seek to chart the course for the next 100 years. Now, my journey into the next 100 years began in 1998, a little while ago. You see, I had the luck to sit next to Professor Laura Strom, and she turned to me and she said, "So, Bill, what's your environmental policy?" I stuttered out the party line. "Well, I sell wood. It comes from forests. It's renewable. They replant." And she looked at me and said, "Are you going to stick with that answer?" My heart sank because the answer never actually sat well with me to begin with. And I realized in that moment I had woken up surrounded by an industry, lulled to sleep by the party line. I had no reason to question my success at that point. I had already grown my business from 33 million to 100 million, 3 times my father's business. I was on a good track. Yet I had to end the convenient dream that allowed me to ignore the consequences of my industry. So I hired one of her students, and she brought me a book. It was from Ray. It said, "From Ray to Bill." Now, Ray ran a publicly traded company in Atlanta, Georgia that did $1 billion a year, and they used petroleum products mined from Mother Earth to manufacture carpet tiles that ended up in landfills at the end of their useful life. And this book changed everything for me. Synchronicity has always been at play in my life, and recently at Conscious Capitalism, I bumped into Nathan Harvey, and he was making a movie about Ray. Welcome to my awakening.
So there was one particular project in Southern California that had an environmental consultant. And he wasn't going to let his client buy products from us. Well, that message got all the way up through the sales chain, all the way to Ray Anderson.
And Ray walked in my office and said, "Dan, what is this about the environment?" He said, "Isn't complying with law what you do about the environment?" I said, "Yeah, Ray, I think so." Makes sense to me. And he was really frustrated. And so he charged a task force to come up with what our interface should be on the environment.
Well, I wasn't particularly enthusiastic about the subject myself. Didn't necessarily want to be on the task force, let alone leading it. So how am I going to get anybody to show up? Well, the hook was Ray. Ray was the legendary, heroic founder of the company figure. So I sent the invitation for Ray to come kick off that task force, and there was no response. And I just kept kind of prodding politely, and eventually he relented.
We were told that the meeting was going to be about environmental positioning of the company, as I recall.
I mean, we had been specifically asked to bring certain information. And so I was scrambling around at my factory saying, what have I been doing here? What are we doing? We hadn't intentionally been doing anything, but we scrambled around and found, oh, we recycle this casting paper and we do this. So the Global Resource Conference, as it was called, it was held in a hotel next to the corporate headquarters of Interface here in Atlanta.
Well, the meeting starts, and then Ray comes in the room. Well, he is only going to be there for a few minutes. Literally has a car waiting outside the hotel because he has to catch a plane somewhere. And I get up and start the meeting, and then essentially introduce Ray to share with us his environmental vision. Nobody had any idea what was about to happen. I certainly had no idea. I didn't even know if Ray had seen the agenda.
Every dairy farmer knows the term carrying capacity, meaning sustainable population, as how many cows will this pasture support? St. Matthew Island in the Bering Sea was a deserted island until 1944, when 29 reindeer were imported. Scientists calculated that the island had a carrying capacity of about 2,000 with no natural control, no predators. By 1963, there were 6,000 reindeer. The scientists thought the calculations had not been correct, but the calculations had been correct. By 1966, in just 3 years, the population had dropped to 42. Not just the extra died, but the overshoot produced a catastrophic effect. The fact that St. Matthew Island exceeded its carrying capacity by 200% or 300% or even 400% for a while did not prevent the inevitable day of reckoning. We are exceeding the carrying capacity of the earth now, and will continue to do so at an increasing, accelerating rate until catastrophe strikes.
What really struck me from it was his heartfelt sincerity. Ray really cared, and he wanted us to care.
Now we at Interface take oil and natural gas from the earth in the form of nylon, latex, energy, and we don't put it back. We make products that end up at the end of their useful lives in landfills. Our industrial waste is a pollutant. We must call it what it is. We waste all along the way.
It was absolutely a stunning condemnation of Ray's heroic creation of Interface as an example of what industry was doing that was going to destroy the planet, not only for Ray's grandchildren and their grandchildren, but also eroding and destroying the economic capability and future of business itself.
Now, who can do something about this? Well, business, industry, that's who. This is the most powerful, pervasive institution in the world and the one doing the most damage. Companies like ours, yours and mine, people like us, you and I.
The big point within that was that there is a huge opportunity for business and industry to use their strengths of innovation and resources and all of that to invent the solutions that are better for not only the planet but the economy.
The next thing I remember and will never forget, he said, "I've decided we're going to make this company a sustainable enterprise." And there was simply silence. And in my case, stunned silence.
How about this for a mission? To convert Interface into a restorative enterprise worldwide.
And suddenly we were going to undertake a different type of business.
Once we're sustainable, we become restorative by helping others become sustainable, putting back more than we ourselves take. And while I'm at it, how about this for a goal? To achieve sustainability by the year blank. You must fill in the year.
Ray gave his speech and walked out, and the place fell apart. There were tears, there were arguments, there was massive defensiveness. This is just fantasy. This is nuts. This is not even possible.
What is the market going to think about this? What are our customers going to think about this?
We were given the opportunity to quietly, individually, think about it. And I did. I then was able to mentally confront what I'd been involved in, and it wasn't pretty.
At the end of the conference, they actually went around the room and asked people, "How are you feeling? What'd you think?"
The meeting didn't seem to be going anywhere at that point. I felt obliged to say something.
So Scotty had been there forever in terms of Interface. So he was very well respected. he was the first to talk.
And I do recall standing up and saying that I had been guilty of making compromises.
He essentially was saying that there's some things that we have to do in business that we know aren't quite right, but we just do them to help make money to provide for our own families. And that man, and pointed to the door that Ray walked out of, that man has just given me the opportunity to make up for all those compromises.
Things couldn't go on the way they were. I had an opportunity to start to put things right.
That man gave me permission to do it right. You see, everything I had ever had, my college books, my education, my family's well-being came from the forest. And although we now lived in a time where our ancestors believed the fish in the forest would last forever, at least by 98, most of us knew that not to be true. So Ray, this book, it was a playbook of how to transform a company into a sustainable company. It was an amazing opportunity. And I looked at it closely. And within was this compelling idea that said when business leaders grasp the compelling economic opportunities of sustainability, they can move more resources and more people to the goal than governments and nonprofits could ever dream of. Now that was leadership, and I wanted to be part of it. So I took a bold move. I broke from the industry party line, and I became the first lumber company in the United States to stock and sell FSC certified lumber. What is that? Forest Stewardship Council certification was a standard born out of the forestry wars of the 70s and 80s, when industry, radical environmentals, and nonprofit social groups came together to form a standard and a way forward. And we offered it to our builders as a choice. So my management team was humoring me. We were selling some wood, but we weren't making a difference. So I conceived of an idea. I flew my entire management team into the Pacific Northwest. I rented 2 King Airs, and we went up to come face to face with sustainable forestry and traditional forestry so that they could come to their own conclusion, not mine. That night, there was anger and frustration, and the next day, we stood on the road above a clear cut, and I ushered to the team. I said, come down here. Because above it was an intellectual experience, but when we stood in the clear cut and the dust came up, we knew the impact of our industry on the planet. Now you see, most of us in that day were struggling because when our children asked us what we did, we knew our answer didn't add up. So by the end of the day, I turned to the team and I said, you may not give a shit about what you've seen here today. This is a dyed-in-the-wool traditional group of lumbermen, right? Or you may actually be moved by what you have seen. Kent spoke first. He said, Bill, when we came on this trip, I thought we'd never see eye to eye. But what I thought is you were a 9 on the environmental scale and I was a 3. And what I discovered is you're a 7 and I'm a 6. And we need to do this. We wanted that story to tell our children. So that began our journey to become one of the national leaders in sustainable building materials supply. And by 2003, we were named Dealer of the Year for significantly moving our industry towards sustainability. But the article began, devil or visionary, about me. Because I was the devil. I was waking the industry up from the convenient dream. So in the way that synchronicity works in my life, by 2005, I was asked to become chairman of the board of the FSC. Now, this was one of the most powerful lessons of my life because I now had a front row seat seeing the interconnectedness of markets and ecosystems around the planet, and I saw the power of consumer demand to transform markets. Today, 20% of the world's working forests are FSC certified, and it's strongly believed that through FSC certification, we can eventually solve 1/3 of the global carbon footprint problem. And then 2008 came, there was a little recession, and my family and I bought a house, and we got sick. So when we first moved in, we'd run the heater, we'd start to sneeze. We started to feel tired and exhausted, fatigued. Well, we had a new baby, so of course we're fatigued. But as the condition worsened, my children started to show up with respiratory conditions that we couldn't explain, frequent hives, and hypersensitivities. My wife became allergic to her dogs, but it had never happened. And I was afraid. I was scared. I needed to protect my family. I didn't know what to do. On my own, I was becoming more exhausted. I was having difficulty running meetings. I was dragging myself out of bed. I was falling asleep in meetings. I was falling asleep by 7 o'clock at night. And I remember saying to myself, well, I am 46 now. Maybe I just can't work like I used to. I mean, the symptoms were insidious. They came on slowly. As they got worse, I felt that I couldn't think clearly enough to run my business, and I needed to sell my 100-year-old business to support my family. Fortunately, we tested, and when we did, we found a significant amount of mold in the house, and we moved out. And we started to get well, and I started to do some research. And I found out that the EPA tells us that half the homes in America have an indoor air quality problem that makes people sick. Wait a minute, I'm a housing insider. How did I not know? How could this happen to me? And again, I found myself in an industry lulled to sleep by the party line. So I'm going to ask you all a question. Have any of you ever wondered if your home has impacted your health? If you have, raise your hand. Now please keep them up and look around. It is not a small group. This is a major issue. Okay, so how does it happen? That's what we want to know. All right, so I'm going to ask you this next question, which already is up here. When all the doors and windows are closed in your house, where does the air you breathe come from? Those of you, anybody? Comes from the house, right? How does it get in the house? Anybody? Cracks, leaks, through the basement. Okay, here's the basic problem. The air we breathe in our house is not fresh air. It's contaminated infiltration air. So air rises, it's warm, it's constantly seeking and pushing up like a hot air balloon to escape from the upper half of the house. Therefore, the replacement air is pulled like a vacuum under suction, and so it's sucking in outdoor dirt, dust, pollen, the neighbor's barbecue, the freeway pollutants. And once it gets in the house, it stays. And the air in our house is 5 times more polluted than the outdoor air. So our house becomes a container that fills up with outdoor toxins. And then we build our modern house with lots of building materials that are full of chemicals, and we bring cleaning supplies and personal care items and furniture, and we create a toxic soup inside our house. And if the house happens to be wet and full of mold, that doesn't help. So how did we get here? You will not believe that when I ask architects or builders, and I've asked thousands to date, the same question about where the air comes from, they give the same naive answer. These are the people entrusted with providing us safe and healthy housing, and they've never thought about where the air comes from. Now, it was the policy of the US government post-World War II to build fast, cheap housing to house a baby boom and troops that came back, and it still dominates and has destroyed the craftsman mentality. We had 1,000 years of history building houses, and we replaced it all for new assemblies and new techniques and new and untested chemicals so that we could live in experimental housing. We think that government agencies are there to protect us, but in fact, they're not paying attention to it. So let's talk about the essentials of human life, most of which happen in the house: air, food, water, shelter, and sleep. Now, we eat 3 times a day. If you don't like a meal, you can pass. We drink 8 times a day. If the water doesn't look safe, you can pass. We breathe 20 breaths a minute, 23,000 breaths a day. Try passing on your next breath. It's not an option. And therefore, we are wired not to believe we have a choice. And this is where everybody says, oh, yeah, but it's all going to kill us, so I'm not going to worry about it. You gave up your power. Turns out that we spend 90% of our time indoors, and the most important place is where we sleep. So if we change the air in our house, we would change our health. And you can do it. There's a process. There are 5 principles to creating a healthy home. I'm not going to go into them all, but I am going to talk about continuous fresh air. It's the most important. When you change the house, and you put continuous fresh air. And I say continuous because are we not continuous breathers? Yeah. Okay. When you do that, and you make the house tighter, so now the house goes from a container of harm to a protector, and you add ventilation, it becomes an oasis of well-being. Completely changes the paradigm. Isn't it amazing that ventilation, fresh air ventilation, will turn out to be one of the most important innovations in the 21st century? Really? Fresh air innovation? Okay. All right. So let's talk about what it really means. This is data from my house. We built the first house, the Hayward Healthy Home principles, and put fresh air ventilation in it. And here we are with very low toxins measured here. And then we turn the ventilation off because most new houses don't have mechanical ventilation. And in 2 days, the amount of volatiles and chemicals accumulated 5 times higher. And that would be a very uncomfortable, headache-creating environment. And we turn the ventilation back on, boom, in an hour and a half it comes down here, well below the WHO guideline, which is 500. And this represents the daily peaks of living. When the kids wake up, when they walk on the carpet, particles come up. If you have no ventilation, those spikes go way up. If you have ventilation, they stay low and healthy. Okay, we know that, right? We know that. For how long have we been saying, I can't think clearly. I think I just need some fresh air. Yeah, well, Harvard studied it, thankfully. And so what they found is that in the typical environment that most of us work in, this was a workplace study, represents typical air. When they changed the air quality to high quality air, which meant low particles, low VOCs, and low CO2, cognition improved anywhere between 60 and 260%. And look at the categories it improves in: crisis response, information usage, strategy. Now, corporations like Google, Facebook, and Hayward Lumber are implementing fresh air strategies across their platforms to get at these competitive advantages. And Harvard even measured that when you do that, you see a 12% improvement in productivity of your team. What struck me the most, though, using wearables, they found that the people who worked in the better air quality environments during the day went on to sleep 20% better at night, which meant I, as their employer, was responsible. Wow. So, industry wasn't changing. It wasn't happening. So I reached into my history, my FSC history, and pulled out an arrow from the quiver, the power of consumer demand. And we invented Hayward Score to harness consumer demand to transform markets around health and housing. Consumers love it. As you can see, it's spread across the nation. You go online to haywardscore.com, you answer 50 questions about your house, where you live, how you live, outdoor and indoor pollutants. It goes through algorithms that took us 3 years to build, and it gives you a 5-page report for free that tells you what's impacting your health and how to fix it. But the most important part of that story is we track 23 medical symptoms. And we now have the largest study on health and housing ever created. We have revealed the truth about health in our houses. Now, if industry was in doubt, if consumers were in doubt, if you were in doubt, it was because of the lack of data. Sure, there were studies, but not 60,000 studies. And follow-on studies that demonstrate when you make changes, health improves. So what is my journey? I had an awakening. I discovered sustainability. And I found that it could access 13% of the market, give or take, small. And then I saw firsthand the power of consumer demand to transform markets. And then I got sick, and I discovered health, which gave us access to 60% of the market. And then I saw the power of self-interest. Because when health was about me, my family, us, it created urgency. And urgency is what we needed to drive transformation in 5 years, because that's the scale on which we need to see significant transformation. And it turns out, when you make a house healthy, you make it energy efficient. And if all homes were energy efficient, we'd solve 25% of the global carbon footprint. It also turns out if all houses were healthy in America, according to Hayward Score calculations, we would save $700 billion a year in healthcare costs. And now we have a way to pay for it. And it turns out that when consumers demand healthier homes, it lessens the demand for toxic chemicals, and that transforms an industry. So here we stand at the crossroads of our past experiences and our future awakenings, faced with this one truth. When business leaders grasp the compelling economic opportunities of sustainability, they can move more resources and more people than government and nonprofits can dream of. So it falls to us, business leaders. We're the ones that have to do it. We hold a unique vantage point where we can see the interconnectedness of things if we choose to. So I ask you in this room, where are you awakening? Where are you willing to give your teams permission? Where are you willing to become a profitable disruptor? You won't be called the devil as I was. You'll have a chance to stand in the pantheon of business heroes that had the courage to act in a time of need. If you don't do it for any other reason, do it for yourself. Do it for your own health. And if not for your own health, your family's health. And if not for your employees' health, for you have the power to do that for them. And if not for your employees, for your industry. And finally, for our planet and the story that you'd like to be able to tell your children. Awaken. Awaken the fierce urgency of you, your own self-interest. Wake from the dream and take action. And so I conclude, but a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? My name is Bill Hayward. My personal mission is to transform health by transforming our living environments. I'm here to empower you to heal our planet by healing your home. Thank you.